Well, good evening, everybody. What you're about to see tonight could probably best be defined by the two words Folsom's Folly. It's what many of you might have thought of doing through your life, but you were smart enough not to attempt it. Just in general, I'm in the major control area in which you can see there's control panels around. And I'll just give you a couple of basic facts about this layout. In fact, the entire house is a 2,200 square foot house, and 1,300 square feet of it is this one large room with a layout in it. And the layout is freestanding. You can walk around the outside of it. I'm in an interior aisle. There's about 2,000 feet of track on it. And the main line looks like a double track main line, but in reality, this is one gigantic circle. All trains would be following each other. And the circle, the main line track, is 1,800 feet long. That's 30 miles in HO scale. A few other statistics. It has Digitrax, DCC. You can see some controllers here. These control panels, while we're looking at them, I will mention that the LEDs that you see lighted here are all connected in series with the tortoise switch machines, so that when the switch machine throws, the LED changes color. And there's probably 150 controlled switches altogether on this layout. This control panel here controls the staging, which is the highest level, or the third level of this layout. You can see a bunch of hopper cars up there. Those are all twin coil momentary throw switch machines, and there's a pair of wires to every one of them to light up the LEDs on this control panel. Those LEDs have no resistors in them. They're all controlled by one big power supply, and there's so many of them that I think the power supply is about 6 volts, and there's a rheostat that controls the voltage. Well, let me get into taking a virtual tour, and then I'll talk about some other issues such as scenery and buildings and so on. So what we're looking at here is a complex that's actually in Roanoke, Virginia. The theme of the railroad is the Norfolk and Western in the year 1954. And the scope is from Lynchburg, Virginia to Bluefield, West Virginia, and Bristol, Tennessee, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Hagerstown, Maryland. In this junction, the tracks going off in the back are the Shenandoah Valley line to Hagerstown. The tracks coming around this Y are the southbound tracks to Winston-Salem. This is just as the tracks were configured in Roanoke. And then the eastbound main line takes off in the distance. I'm going to walk around to show you the continuation of that main line. It's going up grade. In the real topography, it crosses the Blue Ridge mountain range. These tracks are disappearing into a helix, which is going to take them up to the next level. And while I'm right here, I'm going to step up because I have a stool handy and let you see the staging area. The staging area was designed with 14 tracks in order to allow for the amount of trains that I would like to be able to run on this layout. But right here in the middle, there was a space crunch. So 4 of the 14 are actually up yet one more level so that they are sitting on top of some of the exit tracks from this yard. And they reach the main staging by virtue of that top loop around the helix. That helix that you're looking at is probably actually 3 helixes all stacked on top of the other. There are some tracks down below. There is a lower staging. And this is the lower staging route, which is also the branch line to Bristol, Tennessee that I mentioned earlier. Right up here, this is Blacksburg, Virginia, where Virginia Tech is, Bob Earl. And this is the Blacksburg branch that the Norfolk and Western had running from Christiansburg, Virginia, up to Blacksburg. Down below it is the Bristol line. Here are some entrance tracks to the Bristol staging. I'm coming back out of this aisle to get to where the tracks reappear after, or right at the point of crossing the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is Webster, Virginia. The bridge you see in the middle is a model of the actual bridge at this location. Then the tracks are going through the town of Blue Ridge, Virginia. Today, all those tracks are gone, the station's gone, and so is the quarry and gravel company that was located there in Blue Ridge. By the way, I should mention that these signals that you may see on the layout were installed by Brandon Langston. They are not actually Norfolk and Western signals, but he put these in to assist with dispatching when we were, before COVID-19, we were running operating sessions. This is eastbound. We're approaching Bedford, Virginia. I meant to restack the pallets of bricks. There was an earthquake here and they all got tumbled over and I forgot about it. This is Bedford, Virginia. That underpass is modeled right after one that's actually there. This is the industrial area of Bedford where a lot of switching can take place. And here's where the tracks enter the second level of that helix in order to get to staging. At this point then, I should tell you that the track plan, as I said was earlier, a big circle. It's actually what's called a folded dog bone. The circle has been squeezed in the middle so that it looks like a double track main line. And the ends of the dog bone have been nested up in staging so that Bluefield and Lynchburg are actually together in staging. And trains actually can jump from Bluefield's like a wormhole. They can jump from Bluefield to Lynchburg instantly if I want to do that. And there by I can have trains making westbound continuous runs or eastbound continuous runs. Now I'm back in Roanoke. I'm going to go westbound. The Roanoke Yard, the farthest 2 tracks in the distance are the main lines. The next 4 are arrival and departure tracks. They can each hold about a 40-car train, 40, 45 cars. There's a 6-track hump yard. I don't know whether you can see this or not. I'm going to get the camera down here at a level, and you might see that there's actually even a dip in the hump yard. So the cars come down the hill into a dip and then come back uphill slightly, which retards them and keeps them from rolling out of the yard. The track closest to the edge of the layout is what's known as a thoroughfare, and it enables trains to actually get through the yard complex in case all the other tracks are filled up. The thoroughfare ducks underneath the hump track. Here's the engine terminal, and oh look, there's the big 3. It's a Class J, a Class A, and a Class Y. And actually that is 611 sitting there. That is 1218 next to it. And the one next to that is actually number 2200, but we're all wishing it was 2156. I believe is the one that they've got, but they haven't been able to restore it yet. The yard master has his own control panel to take care of all the internal switches in the yard, and but trains have to get permission from the main dispatcher in order to get out on the main line. And that junction takes place here. The freight tracks join the mainline tracks. There's the Blacksburg branch, which in real life does exactly that. It crosses over its own main line on its way to Blacksburg. This is Christiansburg, Virginia. We're headed westbound. Uh-oh, there are some contemporary cars left in this yard. Most of the cars are in staging right now. That's why you don't see too much stuff on the layout. In real life, the Norfolk and Western arrives at a place called Walton. All these crossovers are just like the ones in the used to be in 1954. The tracks venturing off to the right are the main line to Bluefield. The tracks veering or going straight ahead is the Bristol line, which I showed you before runs along on the lower level. Running along the New River, the Bluefield line goes into a tunnel, up a big helix, and emerges right here. Jim Reese, I'm glad you're online, because Jim is responsible for this valley. All those houses and mobile homes were built by Jim. He installed almost all the scenery in the valley. The trestle you see in the distance is the Shenandoah Valley line. I called this place Panther. There is a Panther, West Virginia, and there's another town that has a Y like this, so I combined the two. I was really fascinated by seeing a Y on a bridge like that as it crosses the valley. So that was one inspiration that helped me in my decisions of what to model. Here are some more signals installed for dispatcher control. This is an actual place that's called Castle Rock. And that rock there doesn't look exactly like the real one, but it's fairly close. The tracks go right through and underneath. And we're headed west. Here's a real place. And this is called Narrows, Virginia. And that rock outcropping that you see there has got to be 15 years old, maybe older than that. I don't think Rob Seal is online with us tonight, but Rob Seal made that from a photograph for me. And it was the first scenery I ever had on my old layout back in Clemson. And I brought that with me. It's mounted actually on a big piece of cardboard box, which is what's behind that. Then Steve Humphrey helped me put all of that vegetation on it. This is the town of Narrows. I believe that station's going to have lights in it, and I can see that the cord for the lights is laying out on the layout where it shouldn't be. Brandon installed these signals, and the one on the left with 3 heads on it, the lower head signals for trains to enter this yard up here. And this is an area on the real Norfolk and Western called Glen Lynn, and it has a power plant there. And I'm thinking I might build this one because the actual power plant is so complex I could never make a model of it in the rest of my life. The tracks go on up to staging. So that pretty much does it on the overall track plan. I'm back here in Roanoke, and I want to talk about some buildings here and a philosophy that I've developed that partly has to do with the fact that since I'm almost 82, my days may be numbered, so I better get with it. And the virus actually played into my hands because I'm cutting out going places and even not even going to the museum. So I decided to dive into buildings. Every one of these buildings here is what's known as a kit bash. The gray ones with the green window frames, I don't even have the glazing in the windows yet, but I wanted to put something there to begin to develop the scene. And so the building on the right is actually the front of the building you see on the left. The next building with the baggage cars, I'm going to have to put a new roof on it. It was split down the middle horizontally and made twice as long as it used to be. The next building, pretty much the back of it was cut off. I didn't use that for anything. This one came off our old modular layout, and it was already truncated on an angle like that. It was just perfect with this curving backdrop. This is a cornerstone kit. Haven't fixed the roof on it yet. And so I actually got 2 buildings out of one by cutting it in half on the diagonal. I bought that building at a train show, and that was the inspiration for this entire complex. The track work that you see there, I built over on my workbench and then installed it here. Let me walk back for a moment and show you a few other scenery things so you'll know what my approach is there. You can see a couple of ribs in the back. Those buildings you see there will be up on a hillside. And I'm going to walk back down here and show you some scenery that's under construction. So here's the plaster cloth method. And I make big use out of 3/4 inch thick foam. The tracks are actually running on 3/4 inch thick MDF. And then right next to it is foam so that I can do scenery a little more easily. And those little chunks of foam sticking up then are ribs. And you can see I've stuffed some newspaper in between them, and that's what supports the plaster cloth. So here's raw plaster cloth. It'll get painted, and eventually then it will get covered with vegetation consisting of lichens and about everything else that Woodland Scenics has to offer.
Okay, thanks, Bob. So if anyone wants to ask questions, you should be able to unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask your question.
What are you working on right now? What's your current project?
I burned out on buildings, I'll have to tell you. I got to a certain point and said I've had enough of that. And in fact, let me show you exactly what my focus is right now. This industrial area called for some tricky track work. In fact, actually, there are some things I've done on track work not because it's prototypical or any other reason that I can do it. So this was a bear, and just so you know how I went about this, that track right there was actually a continuous piece of track. And then I started adding other pieces and eventually cut grooves for the frogs and so on. But I start out with the piece of track that has the most curvature to it, and then just start adding on the others using a template. So that's where I've gotten on this project, and my next thing will be then to connect these to important tracks like that. This track is a siding that goes over here, and pretty soon the scene's working it down this way. And even though this is built out here, I think I'm going to cut this back, and it's going to be a place where they can unload coal and aggregates.
Bob, are all of your turnouts hand built?
No. Right in front of me is what's known as a single slip. A double slip has 4 possible routes. A single slip only has 3. Trains can go straight through on either of these tracks, and you can connect across this way. You can see on that side, there is no curved rail. That was hand built. But the other switches here in the passenger yard are 30-year-old Walthers. In fact, they were Shinoharas in those days. Japan was the big supplier of track work in those days. So over here, for example, there's a double slip. All the other switches here are Walthers, except when you get back here, and that's a Pico, and it's a manual. And then the next one is a hand built using Central Valley tie strips. Here are some more Central Valley tie strips in which they're curvable. They do have numbers. That's a 7. This is a 6, and that's a 5. That's a 6. These are 8s on this curve. You have to supply the rail. They supply just the ties, but the ties are detailed and have grooves for the rails in this coal yard. Those are all Central Valley tie strips. So I had to build the rest of it from scratch, including the points. There's an awful lot of filing going on there. I don't know whether you could see those adequately, but that's another whole story. Anyway, so the industrial area is my big focus right now.
Bob, I've been to your layout a number of times. I've run a train all the way around your layout. I love track planning and layout design. And I must confess, I still can't track exactly where everything goes. Your layout is, your track plan is one of the most complex that I've ever seen, but I can't wait to do an operating session on it.
Me too.
You said you were doing some operating sessions before COVID.
Yeah, Brandon and some of the younger rail fans were coming here once a week. And Ross Holt is the Clemson student who's a member of our club.
Yeah.
They came over and did serious operating, but by the time it was apparent things were really getting bad with COVID, they have jobs with a lot of public contact, and I decided it was just too risky. I couldn't have them come here anymore. So there's been nobody here running this layout now for months.
And you still.
Can you all hear me?
Building?
Yes, John.
I was just wondering if you could still run while you're building.
Well, actually, I tried it. I tried to get this cleaned up. I've made an awful lot of dust in some projects. And in fact, since I've been working so hard on buildings and things, so I didn't run the layouts just frankly dirty. I ran a track cleaning train around it yesterday and today, and then found some dead spots because of rail joiners that had lost conductivity. So I decided not to try to run anything for tonight's program. Maybe in the future I could have a virtual operating session, or maybe we can get some of us together who, you know, are all at less risk in terms of the virus, and try and do something towards getting things running here again.
So Bob,
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
how many
Yeah, Dan,
years-
hi.
Hey, Bob,
Hey.
just curious, how many years do you think you have in your layout? It's unbelievable.
I started, the concept of it started in 1992. Just before I moved down here, I knew I was going to move here, and we had a house built over in Clemson with a basement, and I knew what the dimensions would be and came up with this design for that house. Well, I was still working when I came here. I actually was working, and so I didn't work on it. In fact, I didn't even start it for another 3 years. Let's say in about 1997, I got serious about building that layout. And I got to where it was pretty much this plan, but this whole Roanoke scene did not even exist then. I didn't even have that scene. And it was around the walls of the basement. And I can tell you all now that making it freestanding instead of having it around the walls was one of the biggest pluses about this particular layout. So in 2011, I made the decision, or 2010, made the decision to leave there and acquire this manufactured home, and had to scale the layout down slightly, but decided to make it freestanding. It's so much easier to get to things. It actually provided me with more scenery space, with more track space. So if you're planning layout, you might consider that about, whether it's freestanding or up against walls. And from 1997 through 2011, 10 approximately, so that's 13 years, it had no scenery on it except for Rob Seal's Narrows. So I moved here. Josh Phillips helped me set up the basic framework, and all the basic tables that hold this layout up came from the old layout. So the footprint of the layout was set up within just a few weeks, and then I just started it level by level. And this layout is exponentially farther along than the other layout ever got to be. But it's because I've had great help like Jim Reese and Josh helping set it up, and Jim Kimball doing backdrops, and many others who have, and Steve Humphrey. Steve is responsible for almost all the ballasted track that's on this layout, hundreds and hundreds of feet of it.
You have your solenoid switch machines.
They are on the upper level, and there's two reasons. One is that I had them. That was a big reason. But secondly, they're surface mounted. There's no scenery up there. It's just pure functionality. And each switch machine has a set of contacts on it, which control the LEDs, and the contacts are horrible. They get dirty, and some of the LEDs on this panel are not lighted as a result. And unfortunately, I have to go up there and clean those contacts to get the LEDs to light.
Bob,
But the rest of it's tortoise switch machines, and they are mounted underneath.
Bob,
Yes,
can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
hear you.
Can you-
Yeah.
Okay. How come you didn't tell them what my input on that layout was?
Well, that was just merely to return insults.
Thank you.
Well,
I
Dan
was there
actually,
today and
though,
was very impressed.
Dan is one of the few people, though, who has actually helped run this layout.
Thoroughly
then-
enjoyed it. I went over it today, and I was
And
impressed with
hopefully
what he
that
has
will
done
happen
since I
again.
was there.
Yeah, you have made a huge amount of progress since last I saw your layout. The virus has played into your efforts here in
Yeah.
a positive way.
Yes. But it's almost to the point of burnout. Like I said, I got inspired on the buildings, and there's, they don't have their windows, they don't have roofs, but they're there, and they inspire my imagination. And for anyone operating, it is more fun because you see that, well, there is something there. It isn't, I just don't have to conjure this totally up out of my imagination. And I recommend that to you all. That I remember on Howard's layout, he accomplished that somewhat by just even putting blocks of wood with the names of industries on it. Let me share this with you because I think it's important. Even though I have a whole list of industries made up from Roanoke in the year 1954, for me to try and actually copy them would be hopeless. I don't have pictures, plans, and all that. What I did was I picked up buildings at train shows, or from Doc, I bought a bunch from him, that looked interesting. And I thought to myself, I don't even know what this is going to be, but it looks usable. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And so it wasn't so much a case of I knew exactly what I wanted to have here or there. I took what assets I had at my disposal and tried to figure out a way to make them work for me. Like there's a bunch of buildings over here. There's some really interesting stuff there, and I don't even know yet just how I want to use it, although there is supposed to be a tie treating plant in Radford. There actually was on the real Norfolk and Western. So that should be right there in that scene somewhere if I can get my imagination in gear.
Have you had any problem with mice or critters getting into the newspaper under your plaster cloth? I had a,
No, I may sound humorous, but I mean, it probably could be a real problem. I do have Terminix treatments and inside and out. So I doubt if that ever could be a problem.
Bob, have you ever contacted Woodland Scenics and shown them what you've done with some of their product?
No, I haven't ever contacted anybody about this layout. Let me toss out that thing about the 6-foot rule again. I am just not as much of a perfectionist as I internally am. I am not a perfectionist when it comes to doing this stuff. Even this track work, as complex as it is, it works. The trains stay on the track. But if you got down and looked real close, you would see that it's a little crude. And but I guess the takeaway from that is, and I think most other people don't have the problem the way that I do of being too much of a perfectionist. And you don't need to be in this hobby. You can just go at things where I really tried to turn myself loose and not get hung up on, well, I have to finish this building, or it's not good enough, or I'm going to work on this forever till it's right. I have forced myself to adopt the exact opposite and say, let me take a swipe at this. And that excited me, and it's nowhere near complete, but then fine, I'm going to move on and go back towards this industrial area over here and take enough licks at it that until I get burned out on it, and then find out something else. I've got locomotives that need decoders, but I've left that alone for the time being. But philosophically, I hope that is important, or that resonates with you all. And
some of you that may be sort of new to the club may not even realize where Bob lives. But in addition to this fantastic layout that's just right down the door from his bedroom, he lives there, the main line of Norfolk Southern Railway runs in his backyard.
can you see
sit
it?
out on his deck
Yeah.
and watch trains go by as much as he wants to. He's invited us to come out, early in the morning before, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and we're sitting out there watching Amtrak go by. And, then we have some food, and then we just sit there and watch trains till we're heart's content. And then those of us that get tired of watching trains can go inside and watch the trains run on his layout. So if you've never been to Bob's place, maybe after this virus has gone away, hopefully one of these days, you can go out and see exactly what's going on where he lives. That's my 2 cents worth.
oh yeah.
So the Norfolk Southern owns what I'm walking on. Their property extends 100 feet each direction from the center line of these tracks. And this was once all overgrown totally with briars and small trees. And I rented a Bobcat when I moved here and cleared all this off. And I've been mowing it as of late. All these rocks you see came right out of the ground. But this is the view.
Now, I found a video series by a guy on YouTube. He, probably to Brandon's irritation, he hops trains and rides trains all over the country. And I found a video from a couple years ago where he had hopped Norfolk Southern Intermod down in Atlanta towards Charlotte. And I was watching that video just to kind of follow the line from Atlanta up. And when he went through Central, he was recording through that time period of through Central. And I saw him go by your house. And I showed your house and everything else.
Oh
of
my
the view from
gosh.
the train up into your driveway, showed your truck, everything else. I was like, hey, that's Bob's house.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. Now, granted, I don't encourage hopping trains. It seems dangerous as heck when he's standing on the things, but it's kind of cool to see the difference in the perspectives of being on the train line and looking at the scenery as you're actually going through it, as opposed to just standing on the side and watching the trains go speeding by. It's kind of interesting.
I flipped off the lights. I don't know whether you can see much. This is Bedford at night. Of course, this doesn't hold a candle to the museum. The museum is the most exotic thing I've ever seen in my life at night. Brandon went around too. Well, you can't see it so much. There's some light shining in from outside, but he actually put some LEDs in to replicate moonlight. I don't know how this scene looks
Good.
on the camera. You can see a few of the street lights, or the floodlights that are in the yard, but right nearby there's a little bit of moonlight glow.
So do you have a regular house voltage current line that runs around the layout as well? So you can, or how do you-
Just after I moved in, I cut a hole in the wall below the panel so that I could get down below the house to the crawl space. And I put in 6 lines out of the panel. And if you can see this, this is the one post that OSHA requires in a manufactured home with a space like this. They couldn't leave the room 100% open. This post was required. Those 6 lines come up in the bottom of this post into outlet boxes. And so of the 6, 2 of them are for layout power, and the other 4, 2 of them are for the lights that are under, I don't know how to call those, they're under the upper deck and light the lower deck. And then the other 2 circuits are all these ceiling mounted lights. Interestingly, I put those up single-handedly. But now with LEDs, you can have all those lights and it doesn't use that much current. But yes, to answer your question, I added 6 more breakers to the box.
How do you protect this thing from surges? I fried my layout once with a lightning strike.
Yeah, you know, and I do leave things turned on. Supposedly they are on those power strips that can absorb so many joules of oversurge and so on. Maybe I'm just lucky that those things probably don't do what we're told they do.
Thank
Okay,
you for
see ya.
joining us, everyone.
Thank you,
for
Ken,
hosting,
for setting it up.
Hey,
No
yeah,
problem.
see you later, guys. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
setting
Good
this
seeing
up.
everybody.
Same here, Jimmy.